Hey guys, we are finally beginning our coverage of Survivor 50 in the hands of the fans, and obviously we're still quite a bit away from actually seeing the season. However, with this being an all-star season, there's obviously a lot more to get into as we get into the cast and all the stuff leading up to it. And the first video that I'll be making here is a cast reaction video. Now, admittedly, I had already been following the rumor mill for a while, hearing all the names coming up and all the changes and developments made to the cast. However, now that we actually have the cast out, it's time to give a reaction to all the people here. And obviously, there's a lot to get into here and a lot to break down. Now, first up, I want to give my general thoughts on the cast as a whole. And for the most part, I feel like I'm fine with this cast. Now, admittedly, I feel like there's a lot of names I would have rather had on this season, and there's a lot of changes I probably would have made, but I may say that for another video. And I think after hearing about the people we could have had on this season, it definitely makes it a little more disappointing, the fact that those people aren't on instead of the people we did get. But I'm still happy with this cast. It's still going to be an all-star season, and I would expect these people to bring us a great season of the show. But with that out of the way, I'm not going to go through each individual player and give my reaction to them being on the cast. Now, to be clear, this is not going to be a preseason power ranking. I'm going to be saving that until we get closer to the season. This is just my reaction to these people being on the cast, how I feel about them returning, and some general thoughts on how I think they might do. But for now, I'm just going to be going through each person and giving my general thoughts on them, and I'll be going through them in the order in which they originally played. But let's not waste some more time. Let's get into the video. So first up, we have Jenna Lewis from Survivor Borneo and Survivor All-Stars. And I think Jenna here makes sense, as I feel like based off what we got from the rumor mill, they definitely wanted at least one person from Borneo, and while it would have been great to get someone like Greg back, I feel like Jenna fits the role just fine, and I would actually be interested to see how Jenna does on the return here. Now, obviously, it's been a while since we've seen her, so literally going back to All-Stars, and I would expect her to want to play very hard. Now, I'm not entirely sure how well it'll go for her. I could very well see her playing a bit too hard too fast. And even beyond that, I'm not seeing a ton of natural allies for her coming into it. Though it'll still be interesting to see how she tries to navigate the new era, especially seeing her after all these years. So I'm definitely glad that Jenna's here. Next up, we have Colby Donaldson, originally from Australian Outback, and Colby's a name we had heard for a while now. He was definitely one of the bigger old schoolers on the board, and a lot of that coming from CBS themselves, where, if you don't know, CBS actually had a pretty big hand in how this cast came together, where originally the normal Survivor casting team had a different set of people in mind, how they wanted to bring back a different group of people than some of these other people we'll be talking about. However, CBS told them that they needed to bring in bigger names and bigger legends of the show, and with Colby being one of the biggest legends out there, and someone who would be intended to draw in older fans of the show, it makes sense why Colby is here. And again, by the time the cast came out, I wasn't shocked to see Colby here. Though at the same time, I didn't need Colby back, for while he was a fun character on Heroes vs. Villains, I feel like I didn't really need him back afterwards, though supposedly he had been getting back into the show more recently, and I kind of get the sense that he may try a bit harder this time, though I'm not entirely sure how well it'll go for him, where I feel like there's definitely other people I would have had back over Colby, particularly Jerry, if I'm being honest, but again, Colby here makes sense why he's here. Next up, we have Stephanie Lrosa, originally from Survivor Palau, and again, Stephanie being here makes a lot of sense. She was one of the bigger names that had been circulating in the rumor mill for a while, and on top of that, we had seen her more recently on The Traitors and Snake in the Grass. So Stephanie being here makes a lot of sense, and I actually think Stephanie could be an interesting prospect on the return, where I actually think she could be pretty well positioned on this group here, where it seems like she has pretty good connections. I feel like she wouldn't be a massive target right off the bat, and I still think she brought some interesting entertainment on The Traitors, so I definitely think Stephanie could be an interesting figure here, and someone who I'm probably a bit more excited to see, even though she had already played 3 times up to this point, but still, I'm pretty glad that Stephanie's here. Next up, we have one of the biggest names on the board, and that is Cirie Fields, originally from Survivor Panama. And it's sort of weird, as we've been getting a lot of Cirie in the past few years, where she was on Traitors, she was on Big Brother, and we're about to be getting her on AU versus the World. We have been getting a lot of Cirie, and through that, I don't feel like I needed Cirie as much as I needed other people on the cast, but at the same time, I still love Cirie. She's a great player and also a great character. So through that, I don't mind seeing Cirie on another season of Survivor. And I actually think she is pretty well positioned coming into this, where even though she is like established as a pretty big name, a pretty big player, I actually think she has a number of people that should be willing to work with her right at the bat, particularly from the new era side of things. So through that, I'm actually expecting her to do somewhat well here. The question is whether she can pull out the win or not. And while I still think she has the same concerns as I have with every other season she's been on, including that Big Brother, I still think Suri will probably be in it for the long haul once again, and just further cement her legacy as an all-time great Survivor player. Next up, we have another pretty big name here, and that is Ozzy, originally from Cook Islands. And I think it's safe to say that Ozzy is the person who I'm the least excited to see, where I feel like we've gotten what we're going to get out of Ozzy at this point. And really the biggest source of intrigue for Ozzy coming into the season is the fact that he's going to be there with another person that we'll be talking about more in a moment. But really outside of that, I'm expecting it to go about the same for Ozzy, where he'll probably be safe early on, but eventually be taken out. And really, I don't think he really adds much to the season. He's kind of taking up a slot. And really the only reason he's here is because he fits in with the big names that CBS wants, where I feel like if it wasn't for CBS stepping in, there's no way that Ozzy makes this cast, sort of similar to what we got from Game Changers. But again, I feel like Ozzy will probably have a similar run to Game Changers, where he'll probably make it to the merge, but not too much beyond that. But still, I mean, we'll see what happens here. And that brings us right into our next player, and that is Coach, originally from Survivor Tocantins. And I'm actually pretty excited to see Coach coming back, where even though he is a 3-time player, all those times came in a relatively short time span between Tocantins and South Pacific. And now that it's been 14 years since we've gotten Coach, I'll be interested to see how he fares on the return here, how he copes with the new era, where while I don't think he's really changed much in the 14 years since South Pacific, I'll still be interested to see how he does here. I still think he's a great character. And plus, as I alluded to a moment ago, he will be there with Ozzy, so maybe there'll be some rivalry there, I guess. But I actually think Coach could actually have a somewhat deep run within him, where I don't really see there being much of a reason to target Coach early on. And I could definitely see some of the more old school players wanting to work with him, at least initially. Though at the same time, he's not going to be my winner pick, obviously, but I still would expect him to at least make it a little bit within the game, considering that he is like this person who'll be out in front. You can use him as a figurehead. So that'll be something at least, though not someone who I'll have as a winner pick by the end of it. And with that, we skip the entire 20s and go all the way to Co-Wrong, where we have Aubrey Broco. And if I had to guess, I think Aubrey was a last second addition to the cast, where for the longest time we haven't really heard about Aubrey, and instead we had actually heard about Amanda Kimmel, who sort of fits a similar mold to Aubrey, where they were 3-time players, they were a runner-up at one point. However, with Amanda dropping at the last moment, I feel like that's the point where Aubrey entered the conversation. And admittedly, I didn't need Aubrey on the cast, where even though she's similar to Coach in the sense that she had played 3 times in a relatively short time span, I feel like there still hadn't been that much time since she last played in Edge of Extinction. And through that, I didn't really feel the itch to see her play again. However, with it seeming like she's a replacement for Amanda, it makes sense why she's there. And in terms of how I think she'll do, I think she'll probably do better than how she did on Edge of Extinction, where I think she'll probably have a smaller target this time. And I think with her also having some people that will be willing to work with her, I could definitely see her making it a bit deeper into the game. Though at the same time, I think she'll probably have a run probably more similar to Game Changers, where she'll probably be in it for a bit, but probably not be in that much control for a lot of it. And through that, I'm not really expecting her to be a winner contender in my eyes. Though at the same time, I am expecting an improvement over Edge of Extinction. And with that, we're jumping forward to Chrissy Hoffback from HHH. And from this point on, we're on to the players who haven't really had a chance to come back, and through that, this is the first opportunity that these players have had to return. And in terms of Chrissy coming back, I think it makes sense for the most part, where I feel like if you needed to have one person from HHH, I think Chrissy fits the bill well, where she was obviously a big player in that season and someone who people think should have won that season and was robbed due to Ben winning the fire making challenge. And through that, I'm at least somewhat interested to see how she'll do on the return here, where I think on one hand, she definitely has at least somewhat of a chance of repeating what she did last time. However, I think there's also a chance that she could flame out early on, where maybe she'll have a target on her back due to her being this bigger player. But at the same time, I am still curious to see how Chrissy will do, and through that, I'm somewhat excited to see her on the return here. Next up, we have Christian Hubiki, originally from David vs. Goliath, and Christian here makes a ton of sense. I feel like he is one of the biggest locks on the board, with him being one of the biggest characters from one of the most popular seasons. And again, I think Christian really fits the bill here, and I'm excited to see him coming back, considering he was like this pretty big super fan and someone who is a regular on RJP. So I'm pretty happy that Christian is here. The problem though is I think he's going to have a pretty massive target on his back, where I feel like he has a lot of potential to be like the Yao Man or Rob Cesarnino this season. Someone who comes in with this big target and is taken out right away at the start. So I'm definitely worried about Christian being taken out early on, but still, the fact that he is here makes a ton of sense, and I'm gonna be at least happy to see him for the time that he's there. Next up, we have Angelina Keely, also from David vs. Goliath, and again, sort of similar to Christian, I'm fully expecting Angelina to be here, with her also being a pretty massive character from that season, and having so many iconic moments, like asking for Natalie's jacket, and her climbing the ladder. Again, Angelina being here makes a ton of sense. And unlike Christian, I would expect her to do a bit better in the return here, where I'm not expecting her to be that big of a target. And I actually think there are some people that will be willing to work with her. So through that, I'm not as worried about Angelina being an early target compared to Christian, but still not someone I'm expecting to be a winner pick per se, where I'm not entirely convinced that she's really grown much as a player since then. And I feel like her best case scenario is just getting to the end and losing again, which is obviously unfortunate, but it would at least allow her to be there for a while and possibly create new moments, so at least that'll be something. But still, I'm pretty excited to see Angelina here. Next up, we have Mike White, also from David vs. Goliath. And Mike White is someone who wasn't really in the rumor mill for a while, and it very much feels like he was someone who was only known about very late in the process, which I do find somewhat interesting. Now, truth be told, I actually find Mike White's return here pretty funny, where, if you don't know, Mike White was actually a pretty big influence in making the new era what it was, where the story goes that Jeff was telling Mike White about some ideas that he had from season 41, only for Mike White to pose the question, is it fun? And that really motivated Jeff to shift things around and really change the show to the point where we have the new era. So I think the fact that Mike White is now coming back and experiencing what he unintentionally created is a pretty funny prospect there. And I actually think Mike White will probably do okay on the season, where I actually think he's not going to have that big of a target on his back, where while he's become more famous more recently due to him creating the White Lotus, I feel like his reputation will be pretty similar to what it was coming into David vs. Goliath, and through that, I would expect him to do pretty well, to where unless he gets like a really bad starting tribe, I would expect him to find his footing and through that have another good run within him. But still, it's just really funny to see Mike White coming back now to play the new era, considering his role in creating it. Next up, we have the final player from before the new era to talk about, and that is Rick Devens from Edge of Extinction. And I feel like Rick Devens is one of the biggest locks on the board here, where even though there wasn't a lot of evidence for Devens being in the rumor mill for a lot of it, I feel like a lot of people assumed that he would be in the running here, where he was not only a pretty big character on his season, but it's also so obvious that Jeff loves him, where he was supposed to be on 41 to run an advantage shop, only for that idea to be scrapped. He was later brought on as the first co-host for the On Fire podcast. I feel like it was so obvious that Jeff wanted to bring him back that at the first opportunity, it just makes sense that Rick Devens would ultimately be here. And again, I do like Rick. I feel like he's a pretty good character on his own. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he does on the return here. Now, truth be told, I would expect him to have a target on his back, sort of similar to likes of Christian, for instance. Though I think Rick is endearing enough to where he'll probably get around that. And if he's able to find advantages early on, or like be able to be on a good starting tribe, that I think he could be in it for a little bit. Though at the same time, I think he'll eventually be such a big target that he'll be taken out anyway. But still, it'll be interesting to see how his run here goes. And with that, we have finally reached a new era, and we're kicking it off here with Jonathan Young. And Jonathan here makes a lot of sense. He was probably one of the biggest locks on the board of the new era, where it was pretty clear that he was a casual fan favorite at the time. He was obviously a pretty big beast in challenges, at least in the pre-merge. And I think his return here makes a ton of sense here. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he does on the return, where I do feel like Jonathan will be someone who will definitely be used as a shield during a lot of the season. And through that, I would expect him to make it somewhat deep, or at least make it to the merge. However, I think what separates Jonathan from Ozzy, for instance, is that I feel like people will be a bit more willing to work with Jonathan. I feel like Jonathan has a few more connections on this cast, and I do think that'll probably play to Jonathan's favor, to where I would expect him to potentially make it further into the game and be used as a shield for more of the game compared to Ozzy. Though at the same time, I'm still not expecting him to be a winner pick by the end of it. but still, I don't think he's a complete dud coming into this season. Next up, we are skipping both 43 and 44, going straight to 45, and here we have Emily Flippin. Now, Emily's an interesting case, as she had said at the time of the season airing that she didn't want to play again, and through that, a lot of people assumed that she was not going to play again. However, once the casting process began, she began to crop up in the rumor mill, and through that, it became pretty clear that she had changed her mind. And I feel like at the point where she decided she did want to play again, that production would put her on, considering that production seems to like Emily a lot, and she was obviously a big character on the season. So it makes sense why Emily's here now at this point. And I do like Emily. I feel like she was a pretty fun character during her season. However, at the same time, I don't think it's going to go well for her, where I feel like Emily's already a pretty high variance player. She's the type of player who will either be like a very early boot or someone who will make it deep into the season, but eventually be seen as a pretty big threat. And I think now that Emily's had her deep run, I think people are going to see her as this pretty big target, but also not someone that they're going to want to keep around. And through that, I would expect Emily to be a pretty early boot on her season here, which is unfortunate. However, it will at least be fun to see her while she's there, but it may not be that long. Next up, we have another person from 45, and that is Dani Valaderis, the winner of the season. And Dee is actually someone we had not heard much during the rumor mill process, where it was assumed for a lot of it that Dee wouldn't be on, and a lot of that came down to the fact that she is supposed to be on the challenge season 41. And through that really made a lot of people think that she was like sort of blacklisted due to her going on another show, which is strange, as it's clear that production does like Dee a lot, where she was obviously a co-host on the Fire podcast. She also did a commercial after the season aired. I think there was definitely a lot of promise at the time of 45 that she would be this returnee. However, it's the fact that she is going to be on the challenge and that filming relatively close to the filming of 50 that made a lot of people think that she wouldn't be on. However, at the point where we started to hear that more winners would be on the cast and we started to hear her name, it made sense why she would land here. And I do like Dee. I think she'll be a fun presence on the show, and I think she's definitely a pretty capable player. Though at the same time, I also question how well she'll actually do, where, again, I think on one hand, she's definitely proven to be a capable player, and I think she'll definitely be able to gain some traction in the game if she's given the opportunity. But at the same time, there's only 2 winners on this cast, and I feel like with her being a bit of an outlier due to that, I definitely worry a lot for her in terms of whether she'll be a big target due to the fact that she has already won the game. But if she's able to find her footing in the game, and if this cast is willing to allow the winners to gain traction in the game, then I think Dee could definitely be a pretty dangerous player, someone who could definitely make a deep run, though the question is, will she be given that opportunity? Next up, we're moving on to 46, and here we have Tiffany. And Tiffany's someone who we actually had not heard much about during the rumor mill, where I feel like through the fact that this cast was skewing more towards bigger names, it made it hard to see how Tiffany would make it onto the cast, which is funny considering that she is like a pretty big character on 46. It's clear that Jeff liked her, and I feel like had this cast not like been so big name focused, that she probably would have been a lock for this cast. But I feel like with the addition of these bigger names, it made it hard to see how someone like Tiffany could squeeze on, but here she is. And I do like Tiffany. I do think she's a pretty fun character. I think she's definitely someone who has some things to prove. And I'd be fascinated to see how she does on the return here, where I think she definitely has some skills for the game. And I feel like if she's able to reflect upon her experience from last time and is able to build upon that I could definitely see her being a pretty dangerous player on the return. So I'm definitely excited to see Tiffany, and I'll be very curious to see how she ends up doing here. Next up, we have Q, and I think Q is another pretty massive lock in this cast here, with him being such a massive character and a pretty notable player. I feel like it makes a ton of sense that Q will make it on, and the fact that we heard about his name pretty early on in the rumor mill, but it made it pretty clear that he was gonna make this cast here. And obviously, I'm excited to see Q on the return here. I think he's a pretty interesting character within himself. Though with that said, I'm not expecting it to go well for Q, where I very much expect him to be like Richard Hatch from All Stars or Tony from Game Changers, where I feel like the fact that he has seen how big of a character he was on his season, with him having all these moments like the Q skirt and saying big mistake, I think he's going to ham it up for the cameras. I think he's going to really lean into his character. And I think through that's going to make it very hard for him to make it past the first few rounds. I think he'll be a pretty chaotic presence early on. And even though he is this big physical guy, I still think that's going to lead to him flaming out pretty quickly in the game. And while I would love to be wrong for him to have like another pretty big run within him, I feel like the fact that he already wasn't the greatest player in the world, mixing in the fact that he has like this pretty big brand to go off of, makes me very worried that he'll be one of the first few views of the season, but still, it'll be pretty fun while he's there. Next up, we have Charlie Davis from 46, and Charlie's another pretty big lock on the board here, where I feel like it was pretty clear that production loved him on the season with him being a big character. He was obviously a co-host on the On Fire podcast, and again, I feel like Charlie makes sense for the return here. And I actually think Charlie's in a pretty interesting spot here, where I feel like while he could have this target on his back, I feel like there's a lot of people that'll be willing to work with him. And I also have a lot of faith in Charlie as a player to navigate the early game to where I could definitely see Charlie making another deep run on this season. And while he's not the most riveting character in the world, I am fascinated to see whether he'll be able to build upon his legacy from 46. And I think there's definitely an argument for him, like, having like this pretty strong run within him, though obviously we'll have to see what happens. Next up, we have Genevieve from Survivor 47, the only person from 47 to make this cast. And I think Genevieve makes a ton of sense here, where while I would have rather seen Andy from this season being represented here, I think the fact that Genevieve was a pretty big fan favorite on the season with a lot of super fans really gushing over how great of a player she is, I think it makes sense that she makes a cut. And I think Genevieve is a good player. I think she'll definitely be in a good spot. I think there's definitely a lot of potential for Genevieve to do well in the season, where even though she was a big character on that season and was eventually a big threat by the end of the game, I don't get the sense that she's going to be like a massive target coming to the season, where I feel like there'll be much bigger fish to fry compared to Genevieve. And I think that will really allow Genevieve to really make her case early on. Though obviously she could still like make it like a big move that put the target on her back moving forward. But still, I'll be interested to see how Genevieve does in the season. And if she does well, I think there'll definitely be a debate for her being one of the better characters and players of the new era. Though obviously we'll just have to wait and see here. Next up, we have Camila from 48. And I'm actually a little surprised that Camila ended up making the cut here, where admittedly she wasn't really on a lot of people's radars for a lot of the season, and it really wasn't until the very end that she ended up creeping her way onto the cast. And obviously I like Camila a lot as a character. I think she had a lot of really fun lines across the season. She definitely has like this spicy energy to her. And again, I feel like she definitely benefits a lot from the fact that she was on the most recent season. Though with that said, I definitely worry a lot for Camila on this season, where I feel like the fact that she is so fresh on people's minds, and the fact that she came very close to winning the game at the end, I feel like she'll have a pretty massive target on her back, where I would expect her to be a relatively early boot in a lot of cases here, where I feel like she fits a similar mold to like Sierra Easton coming into Game Changers, where she is like this pretty strategic player, but also someone who is not really like used as a shield. So through that, I feel like there'll definitely be a push to target Camila relatively early. And while I hope that she's able to get around it, I'm not entirely sure that she'll be able to do so in this case. So I think that'll definitely be a big worry sign for her coming in. But still, I think it'll be interesting to see how she's able to navigate that situation and whether she'll be able to overcome that or not. And obviously with her being a pretty big character, I'm still excited that she's going to be given another chance here. Next up, we have another player from 48, and that is Joe Hunter. And Joe is a pretty interesting prospect here, where I feel like it was pretty clear that he was going to be on 50, considering just how much production loved him, considering how much the show just went out of its way to prop him up over and over again, to where it very much felt like the show was using the season 48 as a way of introducing us to Joe, who will play a factor on Survivor 50. So I feel like Joe here makes a ton of sense. And I do think it'll be interesting as well to see how he does in the return here. Now, truth be told, I'm not expecting it to go as well for him as it did on 48, where I feel like with this being a more game-focused cast and a bit more dynamic-focused, I feel like it'll definitely be a lot harder for Joe to dominate the game than the way that he did on 48. Though with that said, I'm not expecting him to be that big of a target, where even though he was like this massive fan favorite, I feel like the fact that he lost a jury vote and came in third place at that will definitely reduce his target level quite a bit, to where I feel like if you had asked me before 48 ended how I think 50 would go for Joe, I would have said that it might have gone pretty bad, as I feel like had he won that season, he would have had a pretty big target on his back. But I feel like now that people saw him lose a jury vote, I feel that'll probably make people a bit more comfortable to drag him along in the game. And while I don't think he'll have the same amount of control as he did the last time, where I feel like there'll be a lot of potential for him to like be used as a shield and for a lot of his shortcomings of as a player to really be highlighted, I'm still expecting Joe to at least make it somewhat deep into the season, even though he's not my personal winner pick. And finally, the final player that we have here from a season we have seen is Kyle Frasier, the winner of Survivor 48. And Kyle's someone who I didn't have my eyes on for a lot of it. Now, a lot of that was due to the fact that I didn't think Kyle would win. However, it makes sense why he's here at this point. And I actually think Kyle has a lot of potential here. Now, I could definitely see it going either way, where on one hand, I think he has a similar issue to D in the fact that he is one of the only winners on the board. And through that, I think he could definitely be targeted early because of that. Also, the fact that Camila is there with him, where I feel like people will be assuming that Kyle and Camila are this duo, which is funny considering that we've learned from after the fact that they actually weren't that close, and it wasn't until later in the game that they started working together. But still, I think that'll be the common perception is that Kyle and Camila will just go back to working together. So I think that could definitely play to Kyle's disfavor here, and also the fact that he is a previous winner and a cast that is mostly non-winners, obviously. Though at the same time, I definitely think Kyle has a lot of skills from the game, and I think if he's able to get past the initial target of him being this former winner, that I could definitely see Kyle being this pretty dangerous player in the game, where I feel like if he's able to build upon what he did last time, that he could definitely make a case for having another very strong run within him. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to have him as my winner pick, but I still think Kyle's someone who could definitely do well on the return despite him being a former winner. So it's for that reason that I'm actually going to be keeping my eyes out for Kyle here to see how he does in the return and whether he's able to surprise some people with how he does here. So that's all the players that we know of who we have already seen play the game. However, there are still 2 other players from Survivor 49 who are on the cast. However, we have not obviously seen them play yet. Where first up we do have Rizzo. And Rizzo's someone who was a pretty notable presence across the preview due to him calling himself Rizzo. However, there isn't really much to go off here. And then the same thing goes for Savannah, who we didn't really get much of in the preview, but I feel the fact that we have 2 people from 49 making the cut here will make it interesting to see how they end up doing here. And obviously we'll have to see them play on 49 before getting a true sense of what they're capable of. However, there are also 2 unknown commodities in the game, and we have seen that historically that these players that go straight from a newbie season to a returnee season have usually made deep runs on the season, where we saw this happen with Rupert from All-Stars, we've seen it happen with Russell Hantz from Heroes vs. Villains, even Michaela from Game Changers ended up making a much deeper run than what she did her first run, so I feel like the fact that these 2 players are unknown commodities coming into it will definitely play to their favor if history serves, though obviously with the fact that we have not seen their first seasons yet, it's hard to say what they're truly made of as players here. But there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe while you have with the channel. Now, obviously it's going to be a little bit before I talk about 50 again. We still have 49 to get through and another season of Big Brother and a lot of other stuff, but I'm still going to be covering 50 in the months leading up to the season and obviously covering the season once it starts, so be on the lookout for that. I'm on Patreon and have YouTube memberships if you want to consider supporting the channel. You can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.